The decision wasn't made in your prefrontal cortex. It wasn't weighed, analyzed, or logically processed. The choice to click on this video, that was made by a cluster of ancient neurons deep in your basal ganglia, a region so primitive it predates language itself. By the time your conscious mind caught up and thought, yes, I want to understand this, your body had already committed. That gap, the one between what your brain decides and what you become aware of, is not a fraction of a second. It is a chasm. And within that chasm, your intuition, that feeling of knowing without knowing why, is running a program you didn't install. You trust that feeling. You call it gut instinct, a sixth sense, a gift. You think it's the accumulated wisdom of experience speaking directly to you. But here's what the data reveals. Your intuition is not a wise guide. It is a neural shortcut, a pattern-matching engine designed for a world of predators and edible plants. In the environment it was built for, it was a survival tool. In the environment you live in now, it is a bug, a high-speed, deeply convincing and almost invisible bug in your operating system, and it is costing you more than you can possibly know. This is not philosophical debate. This is the measured output of functional MRIs and behavioral economics trials that have been running for decades. The evidence is in, and the conclusion is uncomfortable. You cannot trust your own intuition, not because it's always wrong, but because it is always running the wrong code. The most important decision you make today will not be made by you. It will be made by a ghost in your machine. If this is the first time you've encountered this idea that the voice inside your head might not actually be your own, subscribe. What comes next is not a collection of scattered studies. It is the full anatomy of how your own brain has been running a program you didn't choose, and more importantly, how to see it for yourself. And before you move on, I want to know, when you read that line about a ghost in your machine, what came up for you? Drop one word in the comments, the first one that hit. No overthinking, that's the point. Let's look at the setup first, because you have to understand the software before you can see the glitch. Your brain is a prediction engine. Every millisecond, it takes in sensory fragments, shapes, sounds, smells, pressure changes, and constructs a coherent model of reality. It does this so fast that you feel like you're seeing the world directly. You're not. You're seeing a simulation your brain built using past experience as a template. That template is intuition. It's the brain saying, based on everything that has happened before, here is the most likely thing happening now. This is efficient. It's why you don't have to consciously calculate every step when walking down a staircase. But efficiency has a hidden cost. The template your brain uses is not neutral. It is heavily weighted towards survival, which in ancestral environments meant avoiding threats at all costs. A rustle in the grass could be a predator. Better to assume it is and sprint away than to assume it's wind and be wrong once. That heuristic, better safe than sorry, works fantastically well on a savanna. In your inbox, it makes you interpret a carefully worded email from your boss as a personal attack. In your social feed, it makes you see an opposing political opinion as a direct threat to your tribe. Your intuition is a survival reflex dressed up as wisdom. If you've ever read a message and felt a cold spike of anxiety before you even finished the sentence, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That feeling, the sudden clench, the narrowing of your attention, the certainty that something is wrong. That is your basal ganglia firing before your prefrontal cortex has even finished decoding the words. You feel it as truth. But it's not truth. It's speed. And speed is the enemy of accuracy when the threats are not real. Here is where the first loop closes. Your intuition is not a higher form of knowing. It is a low-resolution shortcut optimized for a world that no longer exists. The feeling of certainty it produces is not a signal of accuracy, It is a signal of speed, the availability heuristic, the anchoring effect, confirmation bias. These are not academic terms from a Psychology 101 textbook. They are the names of the specific failures your intuition produces, and they have been measured with ruthless precision. The Dunning-Kruger effect alone is a devastating indictment of your internal guidance system. The less competent you are in a domain, the more confident your intuition feels. This is not a bug in the unlucky few. It is a feature of the architecture. Your brain does not have a built-in quality check for its own intuitions. And this is where the data gets worse. Consider the work of Daniel Kahneman. His research divided the mind into two systems. System 1, the intuitive, automatic, and fast processor, and System 2, the deliberate, analytical, and slow one. What most people miss is that System 1 is not the junior partner. It is the default. It makes thousands of decisions per minute before System 2 even wakes up. System 2 is lazy. It consumes glucose. It takes effort. So, your brain defaults to the fast system for almost everything and only engages the slow one when the fast system runs into something it can't handle. The problem is that System 1 is also the system that produces intuition, and it is riddled with systematic biases. In a 2019 replication study of over 3,000 participants, researchers at the Max Planck Institute found that intuitive decisions were no more accurate than random guesses in complex multivariable scenarios. Yet participants who used intuition reported being significantly more confident in their choices. The gap between confidence and accuracy was not a small one. It was a canyon. The participants who felt most sure were the least likely to be correct. This is not niche finding. It has been replicated across domains: financial trading, medical diagnosis, hiring decisions, romantic judgments. The pattern is consistent. Intuition feels like truth, but it does not correlate with it. In fact, in many cases, it inversely correlates. The more intuitive a decision feels, the more likely it is to be contaminated by unrecognized biases. And that's when the data revealed something completely unexpected. The Baltimore longitudinal study of aging, one of the longest-running studies of human brain function, tracked cognitive changes across decades. One of its findings was that the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for overriding intuitive impulses with deliberate reasoning, is the first area to show age-related decline. But the decline is not primarily driven by age. It is driven by chronic stress. The study followed a cohort of participants for over 20 years and found that those with elevated cortisol levels, the stress hormone, showed a significantly faster rate of prefrontal cortex volume loss. The intuitive centers, by contrast, remained relatively intact. The implications are staggering. Under stress, your brain's ability to override flawed intuition actively degrades, while the flawed intuition itself stays strong. You become more reliant on a system you know is biased, while the structure that could correct it shrinks. It is a neural trap, and the trap is set every time your phone pings, every time you refresh a feed, every time you feel the ambient low-grade anxiety of modern life. The cortisol spikes are not just ruining your sleep. They are slowly, silently dismantling your judgment. Remember that feeling of knowing without knowing why? That sensation is not wisdom. It is your ancient wiring running unchecked because the modern override system was never given a chance to develop. And under the pressure of modern living, it is actively being suppressed. This is the moment where the research asks you to take a side. Are you willing to see this, or are you going to keep trusting the feeling? If you're still here and you feel something shifting, subscribe. This channel exists for the people who want to be the unseen operator, the one who stops running on ancestral code and starts seeing the architecture clearly. The next piece of evidence changes the stakes entirely, and I want to hear from you. Which of the three, availability, anchoring, or confirmation bias, do you catch yourself falling into most often? Put it in the comments. Naming it is the first step to seeing it. A secondary study published in the Journal of Neuroscience in 2021 used fMRI to track real-time brain activity during intuitive versus analytical decisions. They found that when participants made intuitive choices, the basal ganglia and insula lit up first. These regions are associated with habit and emotion. When participants made analytical choices, the prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate cortex activated instead. The critical finding: participants who reported higher stress levels had measurably lower prefrontal activation during analytical tasks. Their brains defaulted to intuition even when they thought they were reasoning. The scanner saw what the conscious mind could not. This is where most people close the study and go back to scrolling. But if you want to understand what's actually running your nervous system, stay with me. The next piece of evidence changes everything. Now follow the second loop. The intuitive system is not just biased, it is actively designed to resist correction. When you become aware of a cognitive bias, your brain does not automatically adjust. Instead, it doubles down. A 2023 meta-analysis of 117 studies on debiasing training found that even after participants were taught about specific biases, their intuitive decisions in real-world scenarios improved by less than 6%. The awareness had almost no effect on behavior. The participants could describe the bias, identify it in others, and test for it in hypotheticals. But when the pressure of a real decision hit, their brains reverted to the fast system as if the training had never happened. This is the mechanism behind what psychologists call the bias blind spot, the ability to recognize bias in everyone except yourself. You can see it in others immediately. The colleague who favors a familiar strategy despite better data. The friend who trusts their first impression of people. The politician who sees only evidence that confirms their worldview. And while you spot it in them, your own intuition is whispering that you're different. You're objective. You're the exception. You are not the exception. The data says you are the rule. If you've ever found yourself defending a decision when all evidence pointed against it, feeling a tightness in your chest as your brain manufactured justifications, you know the feeling of your own circuitry fighting you in real time. That tightness is not conviction, it is cognitive dissonance. And your intuition's response to it is not to reevaluate, it is to protect the existing conclusion at all costs. The sensor rotation here matters. The feeling is visceral. It lives in your chest, in the shallow breathing, in the slight clench of your jaw. The physical sensation is not a side effect. It is the mechanism. Your brain uses the bodily feeling, the tightness, the pressure, the heat, as evidence that the conclusion is important. It then interprets importance as correctness. You feel the weight of a decision and mistake it for the value of the evidence. This is the point where the viewer who sees the glitch begins to separate from the one who remains trapped in the loop. The first layer was awareness. The second was the understanding that awareness alone is not enough. The system is self-reinforcing. It feels correct because it feels important, and feels important because it produces a physical sensation that your brain reads as proof. Now the escalation accelerates. Gerd Gigerenzer, the main academic counterpoint to Kahneman, argues that intuition can be accurate in what he calls predictable environments. Domains where the underlying patterns are stable and the brain has had enough exposure to learn them. A firefighter who intuits that a floor is about to collapse. A chess master who feels the right move. These are real. They exist. But they arise from thousands of hours of immediate, high-stakes feedback. The firefighter's intuition is calibrated by near-death experience, the chess master's by 10,000 lost games. Your intuition about which stock to buy, which career path to choose, which partner is right for you, or which news source to trust is not calibrated. The feedback loops are too slow, too noisy, and too contaminated by confirmation bias. You don't get the clean signal of life or death. You get the murky fog of endless information with no clear outcome. Your brain patterns on noise and calls it intuition. And it is this specific kind of modern intuition, the one you rely on daily, that the research identifies as the most dangerous, because it feels identical to the firefighter's intuition. The same neural circuitry activates, the same bodily sensation arises, the same rush of certainty floods your conscious mind. But the accuracy is not even close. One intuition is a razor, the other is a shattered window. The proof is in your own wiring. If you felt your memory slipping or your focus fraying, this isn't normal aging. It's the cost of a life your brain wasn't designed for. And I'm about to show you what your ancestors did instead. Your ancestors did not have continuous partial attention. They did not have push notifications. They did not have their cortisol spiked 20 times per hour by a glowing rectangle. Their intuitions were formed in a world with clean boundaries, food or not food, threat or not threat, trustworthy or not. The signals were clear. The feedback was immediate. The stakes were real. Your intuition is formed in statistical noise, and yet your brain treats both sets of signals as equally valid. The evolutionary mismatch is the third loop, and it is the deepest. Your neural architecture was finalized over 50,000 years ago. Every instinct you have, every gut feeling, every quick judgment was shaped by the pressures of a small group hunter-gatherer existence. Tribal dynamics, immediate physical threats, seasonal scarcity. The modern world is not just different, it is the opposite. Large-scale, abstract, and interconnected. Your intuition for tribal dynamics works perfectly when deciding whom to trust in a village of 50. It catastrophically fails when evaluating a geopolitical conflict or an online argument with 2 million participants. The basal ganglia processes pattern recognition. In a stable environment, those patterns are reliable. In the modern information environment, the patterns are engineered. The news cycle is designed to trigger your ancient threat detection system. The scrolling feed is designed to exploit your novelty-seeking reward circuit. Your intuition does not know it is being played. It thinks the manufactured crisis is a real predator. It thinks the endless stream of novel content is a sign that something important is about to happen. And that's when the data gets worse. The continuous performance test studies measuring sustained attention from the 1950s to the 2020s show a steady and measurable decline in the average person's ability to distinguish between relevant and irrelevant stimuli. The modern brain is faster at detecting the presence of a stimulus, a notification ping, a headline change, but significantly worse at ignoring irrelevant ones. This is not a productivity issue. It is a systemic degradation of the filtering system that makes intuition possible. Your intuition can only be as accurate as the data it processes. And the data entering your system is increasingly contaminated with high-frequency, low-validity noise. The prefrontal cortex is drowning, and the basal ganglia is steering the ship. This brings us to the core mechanism that most people never see. Your intuition does not operate in isolation. It is in constant, silent negotiation with your amygdala, your hippocampus, and your insula. Every decision you think you are making is the output of a vote between these ancient structures, and the vote is heavily weighted towards survival, pattern completion, and emotional consistency. The rational voice, the one you identify as you, is not the president. It is the press secretary. It is given the final decision and asked to produce a justification after the fact. You have felt it. You know you have. That moment where you made a choice and then immediately constructed a logical reason for it, even though the real reason, the one you'd never admit aloud, was that it felt right, or it felt safe, or it felt familiar. That is not a moral failing. That is your brain's press secretary doing its job. It fabricates a plausible explanation and presents it to you as your own reasoning. And you believe it because the fabrication happens in a region of the brain you cannot access. The press secretary does not know it is a fabrication. The neuroanatomy of this is precise. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for integrating emotional signals into decision-making, sends its output directly to the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the region associated with rational deliberation. The emotional signal arrives first. The rational brain then incorporates that emotional signal as if it were objective data. By the time the feeling surfaces as a thought, it is already contaminated. You cannot separate the intuition from the reasoning because the reasoning was built on top of the intuition. Your most carefully analyzed decision is still an intuitive judgment with post hoc rationalization layered on top. This is the hidden cost. Not just that intuition is wrong sometimes, but that it contaminates everything. It gets into the analytical process and changes the weights without you knowing. It makes you trust certain data points more than others because they feel true. It makes you dismiss evidence because it feels wrong. The entire structure of your decision-making is built on a foundation you never examined. You felt this, the sensation of noise drowning out your real thoughts. That feeling is your reward circuit misfiring, running ancestral code in a modern environment. The viewer who recognizes this glitch becomes the unseen operator, someone who operates on a higher, calmer mental plane, while the rest stay tangled in the loop. I'll show you the exit protocol next. But first, the climax of the data. In 2018, a team at the University of Cambridge published a landmark fMRI study. They had participants make a series of financial decisions while their brains were scanned. In half the decisions, the participants were under time pressure, forcing reliance on intuition. In the other half, they had time to deliberate. The result was stark. Under time pressure, the participants made decisions that were, on average, 11% less profitable. But they reported being 23% more confident in their choices. The discrepancy was not random. It was systematic. The same neural region that produced the feeling of confidence, the orbitofrontal cortex, was activated regardless of whether the decision was accurate. The brain does not have a truth signal. It has a confidence signal, and it cannot tell them apart. This means that every time you feel absolutely certain about an intuitive judgment, you have no way of knowing whether that certainty is well-founded or entirely fabricated. The feeling is identical in both cases. The scanner cannot distinguish between a correct intuition and a confident error. Neither can you. The implication is as unsettling as it is unavoidable. The most confident people in the room are not necessarily the most accurate. They are the ones whose brains produce the strongest confidence signal, often in inverse proportion to actual understanding. The Dunning-Kruger effect is not a joke about incompetence. It is a tragic consequence of the architecture. The less you know, the less capable you are of recognizing your own errors, and the more confidently wrong your intuition feels. And this is where the loop closes. Not with a simple answer, but with a choice. Your intuition is not your enemy. It is an ancient and powerful tool that was never designed for the environment it now operates in. The problem is not that it exists. The problem is that you cannot see when it is working versus when it is failing. The confidence signal is the same. The feeling is the same. The neural mechanism is the same. You are flying blind with an instrument that displays perfect weather in a hurricane. If you've made it this far, you are exactly the kind of viewer this channel is built for. Someone who wants not just to know, but to rewire. Subscribe now, because the next video is the one where we take everything you just learned and turn it into a daily protocol. The unseen operator doesn't just see the glitch. They learn to navigate around it. And before you leave, one final question for the comments. What is one decision you made recently that you now realize was your press secretary talking? Drop the story. The loop closes when you stop flying blind.